I'll use myself as an example. My mum's Japanese and my father's Iraqi, right? Now, if I had relatives from each country apply for a tourist visa to come into Australia, I'm sure the government will view that in different ways. Is it possible for those countries that are with strict requirements, is it possible for them to come into the country, say on a tourist visa or on a student visa?
Definitely, it is possible. It is very strict. You need to meet the requirements.
You're building this case to show the government that you are a viable candidate to come in on this basis.
You have assets, all of those items that people rarely abandon when they go into a new country.
How politically driven is the topic of migration?
That's why you may hear in the media every now and again really harsh decisions being made by the government simply because they need to make the decisions against very black letter law requirements.
Welcome to the show, Krish.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Okay, cool. Well, let's get started first. What made you become a lawyer in the first place? Was it something that you always aspired to do, or was it just because you got a high ATAR score?
Yeah, I couldn't disappoint my parents coming from a ethnic background. And,
classic Indian parents, is it?
Indian parents, absolutely. I think it was a passion for arguing, debating. I was a part of a debate team. And, proving people wrong. I love doing that.
Yeah, and I think you get the chance to do that quite often if you're working against the department constantly, right? We've got a government office on the other side. So it's a little bit different to other practice areas of law where you're dealing with an opposition that's also maybe privately funded, right? So we're dealing with a government body here. So it is a little bit different. Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. There are different rules. There's still the same procedural requirements, but you're dealing with what we call administrative law. You need to meet the requirements of the government department and they make the decision. They give you very clear guidelines on what's acceptable and what's not. But sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes they give you harsh decisions. And it's up to us as lawyers to find the in-between and get our people the best outcomes possible.
Yeah, awesome. And let's just clarify here, because the people that are making the decisions, they are not necessarily lawyers. Is that the case?
Correct. Yes. They're working off checkboxes.
Okay. And so they're dealing with people's livelihoods, where people want to live, family issues, and all of that is encoded in the law, legislation, and also case law as well. But we have people that are interpreting it in their own way, but these people aren't necessarily lawyers. Do you see that as a bit of an issue?
In some cases, it can be. In some cases, there is a lack of understanding, compassionate reasons. I think that our laws as we have them now don't provide enough scope for these compassionate reasons to be considered. And that's why you may hear in the media every now and again really harsh decisions being made by the government simply because they need to make the decisions against very black letter law requirements. If it's just a checkbox, there's no in between. They don't look at grey, and it's up to us to find that grey and to push that forward for our clients.
Yeah. How politically driven is the topic of migration? Does it change on every election cycle? How do you find politics affects your line of work?
Politics really wasn't a big issue until around 2012. If you're an old timer like me, you might remember the temper crisis of where there was some refugees who came in on a boat and they were rescued by a boat. Since then, immigration.
Is that the incident where we saw was the babies overboard? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, very similar.
Okay.
Since then, refugees and protection visas have been a hot topic, and that has really expanded into all sorts of migration as people in Australia look at everything from cost of living concerns to housing concerns, renting issues. And I think migration has been used as a scapegoat for those circumstances by the government as well. Each government has its own priorities it puts on migration. And when you see a government change, or a government, I
How
would
many?
say a different party in government, you might see some drastic changes in immigration.
Well, let's go back a little bit. You've been practicing as a lawyer for quite a while now. Do you remember what your first day as a lawyer was like? Was it scary, or do you remember the workplace that you were at?
Yeah, I was working at one of the biggest corporate immigration firms in the world, actually, in their Sydney office, and it was just a normal corporate office. Back then, you would have to fax things, and I think as much as people like to dramatize law and think that we go into the office, into fancy offices or courtrooms and have showdowns with judges and other defense counsels. Much of it really is just pushing paper, fighting with the photocopier to scan something,
Yeah, the printer breaking down is really our number one problem, isn't it?
learning how to use a stapler properly. That was my first day, really.
You know, you'd be surprised at my practice how many paralegals come in and I have to explain the concept of postage stamps, you know, because they have no idea how to send a letter. And when I bring up the topic of postage stamps, their mind is blown that you have to put this sticker on an envelope in order to send it out. And that's how you actually pay for something. Like the whole concept is foreign to them. So I always get a bit of a kick whenever I'm explaining that and you see the expressions on their face. They're just thinking, what dinosaur age have I landed in?
I remember back when we used to have to send faxes to different departments. You would fax it and you'd wait for a confirmation and hope that the confirmation meant it was sent.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, like, it might be quite daunting, though, going into, as you said, one of the biggest immigration practices and worldwide companies. Were you kind of grinded into the dust a little bit? Did you ever think this is just way too hard, I've got to stop? Or what kind of drove you to kind of keep going?
I think one of the first things I'd like to tell any first-year lawyer or law student is get the basics right first. No one expects you to be able to create complex strategic advice, go into court and, win cases if you can't do very basic things right. And once you get those basic things right, you can move forward and go towards those more complex matters.
Yeah,
I think that.
And when you say basics, what are we talking here? Let's break it down a little bit further.
Attention to detail. Sometimes when I was starting out, I would have to review something 2-3 times because I would say to myself, I'm a lawyer. I know how to review things. I know how to spell things. But when you prepare something and you think it should look a certain way, you're not looking at it critically and looking for those mistakes. If you look at something with the idea that you will find mistakes, you will find those mistakes. And that is what leads you to being a better lawyer. Because if you find those mistakes, your clients aren't finding those mistakes.
So actively looking for those mistakes, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it matters across the board in all areas of law, but one particular area, conveyancing, it really kind of jumps out because I remember we had one case once where there was a simple issue of putting in the incorrect dates as to when the contracts were due and when settlement was, and having issues as well with addresses in the conveyancing form. So something as simple as an address, if you get a digit wrong or a letter wrong at the beginning, it can cause a massive ripple effect throughout the case whilst people aren't really looking at it. So you have to make sure attention to detail is number one, which can be difficult when you've got overarching pressures of getting things done quickly and, your boss or your manager trying to make sure that everything is finalized and you've got to get this amount of work done and you've got these deadlines and there's a whole pipeline of people that are waiting for you to kind of complete things. So you can feel quite pressured to move things quite quick, whereas that attention to detail, I think, is often forgotten in those circumstances.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that you need to know yourself how much time you need.
Yep.
And you need to really be able to push back. And it sounds difficult because it is difficult to push back when you're in that junior about how much time you need to do something properly.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, let's go back to your law school days. Do you recall those days? It might have been a bit of a while ago, but do you think that there's something that at law school that really kind of stuck out for you?
I think that when I started my degree, I really didn't think I was cut out to be a lawyer. I remember my first intro exam, and I probably spent 20 minutes just mind blank, wondering, what am I doing here? Is it really for me? I think in my third year, I nearly dropped out of the course completely because of some negative feedback from one of my lecturers. And what the whole experience taught me was to thicken my skin, and that you are where you're meant to be in this world, and you need to respect that, and respect that you can make it wherever you want to make it. No one has the right to tell you where you should be going. It's up to you.
Okay. And so if there was something you could have changed about the law school experience or curriculum, do you think you would change anything?
Curriculum, something that I really push in our practice with our student team, our student visa team, is to tell every student to have a mind's eye of where they want to land. Something that was probably something that I would want to change with my experience is to have somewhere that I was volunteering, somewhere that I could get some work experience prior to even getting out of law. That would have allowed me some time. That would have probably allowed me some time to experience all sorts of different types of law and filter into an area of law that interested me the most. Yeah. Not that I'm not interested in immigration law. I'm very interested in immigration law. However, that experience would have been invaluable at that stage, whereas I had to very quickly learn it in the 6 to 12 months after law school.
Definitely, yeah. I do think that there's a real lack of understanding. Like, talking from my own experience, when I first started law school, I had absolutely no idea as to how the legal system worked throughout law school. Like, it took me probably 1 or 2 years outside of law school after I completed it and had entered the workforce to understand, this is a private practice. This is what happens in a criminal law matter. This is the police department. This is what happens if you work in government, or what in-house is. So all of those different sectors, which are completely different roles, your only kind of perception as to what law is Law and Order or Suits or whatever TV show you've watched. And you think that's what being a lawyer is, right? You think it's going to court, staying up all night, working on cases, dealing with clients. You think that picture that you've been shown on TV is what you're going to be doing on a daily basis. But the spectrum of what is available as a lawyer is so broad, and it really doesn't really come into your head until years after graduating law school. Whereas if you had an idea as to that whole spectrum prior to starting, or, right at the beginning, where it was like really broken down and explained to you, then that would help you kind of aim your degree in a particular direction, or give you some focus behind the subjects that you're studying, and allow you to kind of apply that knowledge whilst you're learning straight away, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, let's switch over to migration, which is what you've been practicing for a while now. Are there any particular cases, without revealing too much information, funny cases or particular cases that have jumped out to you?
I think one of the first learning experiences for me, our trusted client is a very nice, well-spoken man, came into our office and he wanted to apply for a visa, and we kind of explained to him he needs a police clearance for that visa, and he seemed a little bit taken aback by that requirement, but he wanted to apply for the police clearance before we applied for the visa. Experience now teaches me there's some signals that you can get, but this very small, quietly spoken man had a very extensive criminal record, and that unfortunately meant that he was no longer eligible for that visa. And I think what that really taught me very early on in my career was sometimes you can't necessarily trust what people look like, and everyone has their own backgrounds.
So the guy came in and you had no idea that he had this criminal history.
He came in. He was working for a very big organization as a CEO, and he had quite a extensive criminal history, which included assaults and other areas, other offenses that you don't usually see in the corporate world.
Yeah, okay. So he had a shady history and had somehow managed to climb the corporate ladder.
Correct. Yeah.
And as a result of that, he couldn't get the visa in Australia. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
And like, how stringent are those requirements if you are a criminal, you do have a criminal record, and you are seeking a visa in Australia? How closely is that looked at or examined?
If you have a criminal record that will result in a sentence of 12 months or more, those matters are looked at very seriously. If you have a criminal record and it's a relatively minor criminal record, you do need to submit some additional documentation and explain that you've had this in your background, you've got this drug possession charge or something from, 10 years ago. However, they are resolvable quite easily.
Okay. Can you give us a bit of an example as to what minor criminal record would look like? Is it, maybe a speeding or drink driving? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, speeding, drink driving, minor possession of drugs.
Okay.
Or anything less than supply, any kind of charge that would result in a sentence of less than 12 months.
Yep.
That will usually get discharged by the visa officer.
Yep.
Anything over 12 months needs additional processing at what's called the Visa Application Character Consideration Unit, which takes some time. You could be looking at 3 to 4 years.
3 to 4 years to determine whether or not your criminal history is worthy, I guess, of being let into the country. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Why does it take so long?
The Visa Application Character Consideration Unit is quite small. They don't have the resources, I think, to process applications very quickly. And sometimes they are dealing with overseas criminal matters. So you're looking at an overseas criminal charge and equating it with an Australian criminal charge, and that does take some time.
But does that not result in, I guess, criminals staying longer in Australia because their processing time is longer?
It could be if they're in Australia and they're waiting on a decision on a subsequent visa, and they could be in Australia on a bridging visa, which allows them to stay in the country until that decision is made. Certain very serious criminal offenses will even trigger automatic cancellations, which then will mean that you might find a letter from the department saying that your existing visa has been cancelled. That's how they deal with the very serious matters.
Okay. And do you deal with these types of cases where people have extensive criminal histories and you've still got to manage to get them a visa?
Yeah, absolutely. We can assist with all sorts of these matters. I've previously dealt with matters, and really it's about timeframes and making sure that you meet the different timeframes to take the necessary actions. Usually 28 days is the timeframe you're looking at from when you receive any type of notification from the Department of Home Affairs.
Okay. And, how does that sit with you as a lawyer where you've got somebody that does have an extensive criminal history and essentially you're advocating for them to stay in Australia? A lot of people would be thinking that that's a really wrong thing to do, and we don't want these types of people in the country. How does that sit with you morally?
Sometimes you have to think about what type of person this is that you're dealing with now. You may have seen in the media that quite a while ago there was a lot of attention to New Zealand visa applicants who were in Australia on a special category visa available for New Zealand visa holders. And they were in Australia for, say, 10, 20 years. And suddenly the Department of Home Affairs cancelled their visa. If they are in Australia for 10, 20 years, they haven't had any criminal record since that time frame. Does that mean that they have changed their life, turned their life around? How do you feel about someone in that telling them that they need to move back to a country that they may not necessarily know, they may not necessarily have gone back to for 10, 20 years. So that is what doesn't sit well with me. And that is the situation that the laws have kind of brought about.
Yeah. Okay. So, people might have a certain idea as to what these laws were implemented for, but when they come into practice, they're actually affecting people's lives that really it shouldn't be affecting.
Yeah. And we're probably coming back to one of your first points about where is that intersection between the law and morality. Is it moral and ethical to tell someone who's lived in law-abiding life for 10, 20 years they need to atone for something they've done 20 years ago, which could be considered quite heinous, or it could be considered something that a youthful person would do, and indiscretion that they would do. And I'm thinking about something like someone who's been caught in the bushes going to the toilet, and because someone in an apartment above them saw them doing that, they've been charged with indecent exposure. And to tell that person they need to leave the country 20 years later, I'd say that's not necessarily moral. I think that's a really harsh way of our system working. And I think that that's the point where lawyers need to kind of come in and provide that assistance. And it's probably where a lawyer can really make a difference.
What would you say the majority type of visas are?
The majority of the visas we apply for are for law-abiding citizens. They have student visa requirements. They have graduate visa requirements. They have employers that want to sponsor them. They may need training after their studies, and they have employers that wanting to support that training or that traineeship. These are the bulk of the applications. Part of that requirement is family visas for parents, visas for partners, and it's about strategically making sure that we get the outcome for that client, whether it's longer stay, permanent residence, or citizenship.
Okay. And how difficult is it to get people coming from a different country into Australia? Like if it's a hard to reach country, how tricky is it, let's say on a tourist visa?
A lot of the programs by the department look at whether you're a genuine entrant and you genuinely want to come into Australia on a visit for a tourist visa. You have to show that you have an intended departure date. A lot of the times this may include reservations for flights leaving the country.
Yeah.
And you need to show that you have overseas that you don't intend to abandon.
Yeah.
Things like employment, family members, social commitment, assets. All of these items really paint a picture that you have the intention to leave the country, which is something that the Department of Immigration look at.
So, I'll use myself as an example. My mum's Japanese and my father's Iraqi, right? Now, if I had relatives from each country apply for a tourist visa to come into Australia, I'm sure the government will view that in different ways, right? So my Japanese side, it would be much easier for them to enter the country. But if someone from Iraq, or a country where the Australian government might be a little bit more concerned about, if they were to apply for a tourist visa, it wouldn't be as straightforward, I imagine.
You are right. Unfortunately, there is a difference in the nature simply because of the risk levels that the department look at in terms of historically, do people from that nation overstay in Australia, or do they go on to apply for protection visas?
Is that what it specifically is? Is it protection visas that they're worried about? Or is it maybe if they stay on and apply for a partner visa, or were they worried about those protection visa numbers? And so it's a bit of a political move in that sense.
It is a political move. It is based on protection visas or historical overstaying numbers. So if the country has historically a large number of people who overstay illegally, then you'll find the way the department look at the application is a lot more stricter. We're talking people from the Indian subcontinent, African subcontinent, Philippines, Vietnam. Historically, those applications are looked at very strictly. Whereas if you look at other countries like the UK, Ireland, Asian places like Thailand, even New Zealand, they're not looked at as strictly.
So then is it possible for those countries that are, with strict requirements, is it possible for them to come into the country, say on a tourist visa or on a student visa? If, let's throw out some of these difficult countries out there like Afghanistan or Bangladesh, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Somalia, all of those countries where you would be, concerned for people coming into the country and applying for protection visas. Is it still possible to come in on a tourist or student visa?
It is possible. Definitely, it is possible. It is very strict. You need to meet the requirements to a T. A lot of that requirement will center around proving to the department you're not coming to Australia to stay illegally. Do you have work commitments, study commitments, your partner, your family overseas? Do you have a job that provides for your family and yourself that will show that you don't intend to abandon that job? Do you have assets? Do you have all of those items that people rarely abandon when they go into a new country?
Okay. So I'm imagining a thick stack of documentation here to support your case, right? You're building this case to show the government that you are a viable candidate to come in on this basis because you are going to leave.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And then let's talk a little bit about the 482 visas and work-sponsored visas. Can you give us a bit of background on that and what they could be useful for potentially somebody that's looking to employ someone or sponsor someone from overseas?
So employer-sponsored visas, the 482 visa, is designed to meet shortages within the Australian labour market. That means that there's an occupation list called the core skilled occupation list. And if people have the relevant experience, being 12 months, and have a job offer from an Australian employer, they can come to Australia on that visa for up to 4 years and work for that employer. The purpose of the 482 visa is to complete that period of employment. However, once you complete 2 years of relevant experience, you're able to apply for what's called the employer-sponsored subclass 186 employer-nominated scheme visa. That visa allows you to then apply for permanent residence on the basis of a permanent role at that business.
Okay. And are there any, recent changes that people should know about with the 482 visa, employer-sponsored visas?
So in December, there was a little bit of an overhaul for the 482 visa. It went from the temporary skill shortage visa to the core skilled occupation list, or the SID visa, they call it now. The SID is much the same, very similar. It has an increase in the salary requirements from 53,000 to 3,150. And come July, that's going to increase again to 76,000.
So you're saying that previously these workers had to get a minimum salary of $53,000, is that right?
Correct, yeah.
And that was only as recent as last year?
Correct.
And now that has been increased, or it will be increasing. It's already increased to 73, but it's increasing again to 76,000. These are huge jumps. And I think for a lot of employers that had originally employed potential staff on those lower wages, it must be a bit of a hit or a bit of a shock to them.
It is. I think that the increase in wage is increase in salary requirement is on the basis of the CPI index and the increased expectations of minimum salaries in Australia. So when we do have employers that have a requirement below that, we consider other options such as a training visa, which allows you to very similarly sponsor an employee, but sponsor them for training. The training visa does not have that salary requirement because it's a trainee.
Okay, so there's no minimum salary requirement at all, is that right?
The minimum salary requirement would be to show that it's a a long expected rate,
Yeah.
which would be for a training in that occupation. You're not talking about 20,000 or 30,000. You're probably looking at around 50 to 60,000 being the minimum expected for that person.
Okay. And what are the typical kind of clients that we're talking about here that are sponsoring workers? Are there particular businesses or specific industries that there's a higher tendency to get overseas workers?
Whenever there's a shortage of Australian employees who perform that work, a lot of the times it's trades, it's more manual jobs right now, higher skills, financial services, even technology roles. They're all available on the occupation list. And the people who are employed in those skilled roles are usually highly skilled people who have experience and provide, they almost multiply in their role because they're so proficient at what they do.
Okay. And do you think is that list constantly changing?
The list has been set, but there are organizations that continuously advise government around occupations and whether they are meeting Australia's skill shortages.
Okay. And what are the types of clients that you deal with?
I mainly deal with, I'd say, small to medium business organizations who have specific needs, engineering consultancies, labor organizations, construction organizations. A lot of these companies have a specific need that they've been trying to fill for 6 to 12 months. And they've resorted to finding someone from overseas or even someone in Australia who needs a visa to meet that requirement.
Yeah, that's quite interesting because I think, to the common layperson and their understanding around migration and having work visas is only what's visible to them, and I know what's visible to me, and that is I can see in a lot of restaurants or in the hospitality industry, there's a lot of like overseas workers. They could be students, but definitely from overseas. You might see it also on construction sites, so with trades. So I'm actually a little bit surprised to hear that there's also a skill shortage, I guess, on the higher end of more sophisticated skills in high-end corporate environment. Is that something that's quite recent or it's always been like that?
It's always been like that. If you have a look at the occupation list, you have every occupation from software engineer to accountant general to external auditor to financial manager. All of these occupations are occupations that are sponsored through the higher organizations. Think big banks, think the big four professional services firms, think management consultancies who sponsor these occupations. However, they probably sponsor people who are a niche in their roles. They might be quite specialized in a particular type of IT infrastructure or accounting practice. That's why they'll be sponsored by this organization and for a particular project in Australia.
Okay. All right. Let's get into the topic of AI because, that's something that's been thrown around a lot. And I'm sure you've seen it maybe with clients that you have in terms of documents that they're creating and things like that. People are using it. I've seen it all across the board where clients are drafting responses to me or creating court documents with the help of AI, ChatGPT. Do you see that firstly as a more common occurrence in your practice? And also, I was thinking, do you think we're going to get to a stage where the department is actually assessing applications with the help of AI? So we're not talking a person reviewing these applications anymore. It's going to be an AI model that reads all the data and is able to make an assessment based on what's in front of it.
I think that I do see, to the first part of your question, I do see and I've kind of identified how I can tell AI has drafted something based on the way that the information is presented. It appears too friendly, too matter of fact.
Yeah, and the formatting, it's always a bit of a giveaway, the way things are formatted.
Yeah, and they use US spelling.
Yeah, a lot of
which is dead giveaway. Yeah. The department probably, without telling us, uses AI to some degree to review particular types of applications. I don't think they're sophisticated enough to review applications solely based on AI. but we will be heading probably towards that.
Yeah, because that's wild. We're going to get to a stage where you've got AI models determining who's going to come in and out of a country. And I think we're not that far away from that.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think we're that far away. We're probably looking at within 5 years to start seeing that in some real sense. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, Krish, I think we will wrap it up there. And I appreciate your time coming onto the show and wish you all the best on your practice.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me. Thanks a lot.